Welcome, everyone, to the Sound Devices webinar presented by TC Furlong. We're happy that everyone can be here with us today. Before we get started, we have some brief introductions. So first off, I am Brian Grahn with the TC Furlong sales and marketing team. For those that are unfamiliar, TC Furlong is a live sound company based in the Chicagoland area. We specialize in pro audio equipment sales and rentals, live event production, and specialty services, including loudspeaker, system design and alignment, RF coordination, and repair services. All right, so today we are joined by Joel Pare, the regional sales rep with Sound Devices. Hey, Joel, how are you today?
Hey, I'm well, Brian. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So with that, I think we can jump right into it.
That sounds great. We've got a lot to cover in an hour, so I will start sharing my presentation here and we'll get off and running. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending. First off, for anybody who's not familiar with Sound Devices, I just wanted to give a little background on the company. So we're a Wisconsin-based manufacturer. We've been in business 23 years. We really cater to film and television, although our products have found their way into just about every facet of recording in the industry. So we're a relatively small company. We do business the old-fashioned way. We still answer our phones. We have a service department. We stand behind our products. Most of our products are still manufactured in the US. And today we're going to jump into the MixPre II Series. So the MixPre series, the entire concept behind this series was to bring Sound Devices quality to a more entry-level price point. Still maintain the same build quality and sound quality you would expect from Sound Devices in our higher end series, but bring it down and make it more accessible to everybody for just about any application you could think of. So first, I just wanted to talk about the physical features of the MixPre series. So when I say we wanted to keep the same build quality, I think we achieved that. Everything is built into an aluminum chassis. We have anti-slip pads on the top and the bottom, as well as a 1/4-20 mount for mounting. And I'm holding up our MixPre III right now. This is the MixPre III and the MixPre 10. And I'll certainly get into each product and give you an overview. Each product has a sunlight readable touchscreen, and it's very responsive. It's very similar to the technology in an Apple iWatch. So regardless of the size of your fingers, it's easy to access menu parameters. And I've got it dimmed down now because that actually works better with the camera, but out in broad daylight, you can certainly see the screen. So you can work in just about any environment. There are LED rings around each of your inputs. Those will glow green when you have a good consistent level. It'll go to orange when you hit the limiter. And then should you start clipping, it'll turn red. And I find myself when I'm using the MixPre, when I'm monitoring visually, I'm primarily looking at those LED rings as opposed to the front panel display, which also has metering. So they're very effective. All the products we make are serviceable. So if there's an issue down the road, it's certainly something you could send to us in Reedsburg and we can fix it and send it back to you. I know a lot of our competitors' products, for something as little as a headphone jack breaking, essentially you've got to throw the product away and buy a new one. So it's a core fundamental of the company that we make products that last the test of time. And we stand behind them with a 2-year warranty. Also want to mention we have a fantastic tech support crew. So if you have questions, you're welcome to call us at any time. And certainly a lot of our partners are very knowledgeable on our products as well. But if you have applications or technical questions, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us and we're happy to talk you through those scenarios. All right, so again, as an overview for the MixPre, each of these products is a recorder, a mixer, and a USB audio interface. And you can do all of those functions at the same time. This is the 2nd generation, and we've implemented some additional features. There's a little bit more horsepower under the hood, which allows us to add some things such as plugins. It allowed us to tweak some of the existing features, such as adding some parameters for adjustments on limiters. It's a lot of these things come from feedback from our customers. So we do our best to implement those requests when we can. And really, that's another sort of fundamental of the company is the dialogue between us and our customers. Okay, on to sound quality. All of the MixPres use the Cashmere preamps, and that's sort of the basis of the sound quality of the MixPre. It's a very wide frequency response of 10 hertz to 80 kilohertz, very low noise at negative 130 dBV. What that means in layman's terms is you can record a whisper at a very low level and then normalize that audio without bringing up any noise. We have wide dynamic range as well. So there again, you can record a whisper to a scream on our devices without any sort of audible distortion. Everything that we make is built around a very clean capture. And the preamps have a lot of gain available. There's 76 dB of gain. So these will work with low output microphones, such as large diaphragm dynamic mics, ribbon mics. There's plenty of gain where you won't need an external device to boost that signal prior to going into our preamp. Okay, so let's dive into each product individually here. Here we go. So starting with the MixPre III. Looking at the front panel, we've got our 3 faders, and you actually push those faders in to access any channel specific settings, and then play, stop, record. LED rings, of course, and the sunlight readable touchscreen. On the left-hand panel, we've got 2 full-size XLRs. I'm going to move my screen a little bit here so I can see. 2 full-size XLRs. We've got a USB-A and a USB-C connection, our on-off switch, and a stereo output. And then on the right-hand side of the device, we have a rotary encoder, which is used for headphone adjustment as well as menu selection. We've got a 3.5 millimeter headphone connection and aux input, and our third preamp. And this is an HDMI connector, a micro HDMI connector. So we work with a variety of cameras, and we can take in timecode over HDMI as well as record triggers. So this device is very common now for use with a camera. And with the quarter 20 mounts, you can actually mount it between the camera and a tripod. So nice little bolt-on interface for just about any digital SLR camera. Now it also operates as a 3x2 mixer, and a USB audio interface would give you 5 outputs and 2 inputs from the computer. So your outputs would consist of your 3 isolation tracks as well as your left and right mix. And then you have those 2 returns from the computer as well, so that you can record, like in this instance, I'm bringing audio in from Zoom and simultaneously sending audio via USB as well. And then just general size here, we're at about a pound, about 1.5 inches tall, just over 5.5 inches deep, or excuse me, wide, and just over 4 inches deep. And on to the MixPre VI. So you'll notice it's slightly bigger. We've got an additional preamp, and on the front panel, we also have this key on the front with an asterisk, and that's a shortcuts key. So that's a feature that's added on the MixPre VI. That allows you to set different menu settings that you'd like to access quickly. So that's an adjustment that can be made in the menu. And on the MixPre VI, we use combo connectors. So you can use 1/4 inch tip sleeve, TRS, or XLR for your inputs. And looking at the left panel here, we've got 2 XLR inputs. We've got our stereo output and our USB connectors and the on-off switch. And then on the right-hand side, we've got our second 2 preamps, XLR connectors, and we've got our auxiliary input, our headphone input, our rotary encoder, and again, a micro HDMI. Now, one thing I'd like to point out here, the aux input on these devices can be used as a stereo line level source. It can be used as a plug-in power microphone input. It can be used as a camera return or a linear timecode input, and that's all settable via the main menu. Now on the MixPre VI, if you're using that aux in, as a microphone input or a stereo line level input, there are isolation tracks. Isolation tracks 5 and 6 are dedicated to that input. That's not present on the 3. On the 3, if you're using that aux in as an audio source, we would need to designate that into one of the preamp channels. So it's one of the differentiators between the 6 and the 3. It's very common that we'll have customers already own one of our devices, like maybe one of our previous MixPres, which was just an analog mixer, and they'll use that to bring in another couple channels of wireless. On the MixPre 6, we can do that without eating up any of our preamp inputs. So again, just to recap, 4 preamps on this device with 8 recordable tracks. So that would be our 4 preamps have an ISO track, our 5 and 6 isolation tracks, which are dedicated to the aux input, and then our left and right record track. And this operates as a 6x2 mixer, as well as an 8-out and 4-in USB audio interface. And it's the same height as a MixPre 3, and just a little wider at just under 7 inches, just under 5 inches deep, and just over a pound. And onto the MixPre 10. So the MixPre 10, we've got 8 preamps, 4 on the left and 4 on the right. And again, we're using the combo connectors. Now the MixPre 10 also has some dedicated BNC inputs. And I hope I'm not driving you guys crazy by using my mouse as a pointer here. But the BNC connections are dedicated for timecode as well as word clock. Now, one sort of cool thing we could do here is you can actually link 2 MixPre 10s via word clock and timecode, and you could set record triggers on the secondary device. So you can mate 2 of these together for a very inexpensive, high quality 16-channel recording setup. It's all battery powered. That's a common application for MixPre 10s. And then further on the left panel, we've got our USB connections, our on-off switch, and the X1, X2 is an auxiliary output. Now moving over to the right-hand panel, you'll notice we have balanced outputs on TA3 connections. Now for anybody who's not familiar with TA3s, these are, think of it as a mini XLR connector. It's a balanced output that's full line level. And we've got a little bit more routing flexibility here. So you'll notice it's a 10x4 mixer, and we've got full routing flexibility over each of these 4 outputs. And then as an interface, it's a 12 out to the computer and 4 return from the computer over USB. So again, that would be our 8 preamps, our 2 auxiliary inputs, plus the left and right mix can all be individually fed to the computer. And then size-wise here, just for reference, just under 1.5 inches tall by just over 8 inches wide and just under 7 inches deep, and roughly 2 pounds. Now, all the weights I've given you, by the way, are without batteries, so the batteries would add a little bit of weight. A quick look at the back panels here. So our SD card slot is on the back panel, and that would reside behind the battery caddy. And it's a good time to mention we do have file transfer capabilities via USB-C as well. So if you have this in a production sound bag and you don't want to tear the bag apart in order to access your files, you can just connect via USB-C and set this up as an external hard drive. And I also want to point out we've got the Allen key as well as a little anti-rotation pin, and those are magnetically held in place behind the battery caddy. And on the MixPre 10, off to the left here, we've also got a dedicated Hiroshi 4-pin input. That'll accept anywhere from 10 to 18 volts DC. And MixPre 10 ships with a power supply, and it's very common that our customers would use a battery distribution system as well. So it's nice having that dedicated DC input on the 10. All right, on to powering. The MX4AA battery caddy ships with the MixPre 3 and the MixPre 6, and the MX8AA battery caddy ships with the MixPre 10. Now the battery caddies are interchangeable, so you can certainly use one of these additional battery caddies on a 3 or a 6. I should note here, it's best not to use alkaline batteries due to the chemistry of those batteries. They won't last very long in our product. So it's best to stick with lithium or nickel metal hydride batteries. And I'm just noticing we've got a question here.
Yeah, Joel, looks like we got a question about the USB interface function. You mentioned for the MixPre 10 as a 10 out, 4 in. Is that meaning 10, the DAW would see that as 10 inputs?
That's correct.
And then 4 outputs? Okay.
Yep, and I did intentionally switch that on these slides just to actually note that it is outgoing streams to the computer, and then we've got 4 returns. And I think we actually listed the other way on our website, but that's absolutely correct. You've got 10 individual outgoing streams to the computer.
So that does include the left-right mix.
It does. Yeah, so your 8 preamps, the additional 2 auxiliary isolation tracks, as well as your left and right mix.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on with powering here. So a few more battery caddies to run through. We've got the L-mount battery caddies, which if anybody's not familiar with L-type batteries, that's a Sony protocol. These batteries have been around forever. They're widely available through a number of manufacturers. So the MXL mount, as you'll notice here, and I've actually got one of these off to my left as well. This would sit perpendicular to the unit. And we've got the mid-size, which I believe is an NPF 770 size battery shown here. So this would be, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I've got the smallest capacity, the NPF 570, and then we've got the mid-size, which would be the 770 or RXLB2 on the top. And I wanted to show that just for reference. So these batteries are hot swappable on the MXL mount, but they do sit perpendicular to the unit. So we'd have to accommodate for that in a production audio bag, which is why we also offer the MXLM1. And that would allow you to use a larger capacity like an NPF 970 size battery or RXLB3, and that'll sit in line with the unit. And then we've also got the MX Hiroshi. That is a 4-pin connection, accepts anywhere from, I believe, 10 to 18 volts DC on that as well. And that'll attenuate that incoming power down to be usable by the battery terminals, which will take anywhere from 5 to 8.4 volts. So again, it's very common that our customers already own a battery distribution system or a battery cup with a large capacity L, like NP style battery or smart battery. So this gives some additional flexibility with tying into that system for the MixPre 3 and the 6, or it gives you a redundant connection for the MixPre 10. Okay, and just a few more things to cover on power. The MXPSU is the USB-C power supply for the MixPre 3 and the 6, and that ships with all the various country adapters. So if you're traveling at all with the MixPre, you're covered there. And then we've got our XLWPH3, and that is our Hiroshi 4-pin power supply, and that ships with the MixPre 10. And then last but not least, I wanted to mention power banks. There are a number of approved power banks, which is essentially a large capacity USB-C style battery that'll do a great job powering a MixPre 3 or MixPre 6. Not compatible with the MixPre 10 as the primary power source on the 10 is that Hiroshi 4-pin connection. A power bank like this, all depending on how much phantom power you're using, will run really 6-7 hours under constant use. So nice high capacity, inexpensive option there. Okay, we'll dive into a few modes of operation. So in the system menu, there's 3 different modes: basic, advanced, and custom. Think of basic mode as the MixPre will operate as a 2-channel recorder that's just recording a left and right mix. And the menu is simplified. And an example of that would be like a high pass filter, for example, would just list as on or off. So the concept here was we wanted to make this as accessible as possible, even if you don't want to be an audio professional to use it. So a lot of times camera guys, for example, will use this. They want to be more focused on the shot, on the lighting, on the conditions on set. They don't necessarily care about the individual parameters. They just want good, clean audio going to their camera and ease of use. So that's the concept behind basic mode. And the MixPre 3 and 6 ship in basic mode. So I'll go through the others here and kind of decide what would be best for your application. Advanced mode opens up all of the features for the MixPre. And it also allows the MixPre to operate more like a tabletop mixer in that you've got an input trim and an input fader. So the input trim would be up to 76 dB of gain that's feeding just your isolation tracks. And the fader then allows you to mix those signals to create a left and right mix and send that audio out of one of your outputs on the MixPre. And then custom mode is a blend between the two. Custom mode allows you to pick and choose which advanced features show up in your menu. Now, the most common way that custom mode is used is for sound effects recordists. They prefer to be able to ride their input trim, but they don't necessarily want to access a menu, select trim, and then make adjustments. They want to be able to make quick adjustments and have all their gains set to the front panel faders. So we can do that in custom mode just by setting the gain to basic, and then really everything else can be set to advanced, so you've got access to all those additional parameters. Okay, and then I'll go through some of the channel features here just so you can see what's individually selectable on each input. So soloing, mute, track arming, individual gain settings, pan, and low cut filters are all accessible in each channel input menu. And then on page 2 here, we can select our input type between mic, line, and USB. Phantom power is individually selectable per channel. So if you're using any microphones that aren't tolerant of phantom power, like ribbon microphones, for example, we can turn that off per channel. And then we've got phase reversal, individual delay, noise assist, if you have that installed, which is a plugin that we offer that I'll go into a little bit further. And then channel linking. And one thing I wanted to mention on channel linking, we either have the ability to link all of the channel parameters or link just at the fader. So if, for example, you're using 2 non-matched capsules that need independent gain settings, you can link just at the fader and keep those gain settings individual to each capsule. Limiters. This is a big thing that sets us apart from our competition. We use analog limiters on just about all of our devices. And in the Mark II series, we gain the ability to adjust the parameters of those limiters. Now, if you've got anybody's familiar with a MixPre Mark I that also had analog limiters, but the limiter settings were basically on or off, and that was a global setting. And they were fantastic limiters, but they were really geared towards dialogue. So if you're using it for sound effects, for example, you might hear that limiter engage and disengage, although your recording would stay clean. So it'd give you some work in post to adjust those levels back where they needed to be. But now you can adjust in the Mark II series, you can adjust the ratio, the release time, and the threshold.
And Joel, those limiter settings are on each channel, or is that a global again?
That is a global setting.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, outputs. We've got a lot of output routing flexibility as well. So we can send our mix, we can send channels, aux ins, or USB ins, either pre or post fade. And this is showing a MixPre 10 menu, by the way. This is all individually selectable per output. So whether you're using the TA3 outputs or the 3.5 millimeter outputs. You can use a breakout cable off of that 3.5 to get 2 individual outputs on the MixPre 3 and the 6, and then on the auxiliary outputs on the 10. So lots of output routing flexibility. We also added USB output routing via firmware. This has been really a heaven sent, especially over the course of this last year. Everybody's transitioned to doing everything via some form of online meeting. So what USB output routing allows us to do is select what is present on our outgoing streams. And now's probably a good time to talk a little bit about my setup. So I'm currently using a MixPre 6, and I'm utilizing the USB output routing to make sure, Brian, when we're speaking, you're not getting your audio fed back to yourself. So I've got my local mic connected to channel 1. I've got my USB returns coming in on channel 3 and 4. And then I went into the USB output routing menu, and I'm just designating that my audio is feeding to the USB stream. Everything else is turned off. So if you've ever been in a situation where you're getting that sort of weird delay where your own audio is fed back to yourself, this is a great way to combat that. Headphone monitoring, yet again, lots of flexibility. So we, as a company, I don't think we talk quite enough about the quality of our headphone amplifier. So it's 300 milliwatts output. What that essentially means for us is we can use low impedance or high impedance headphones. And even in a noisy environment, you can drive those headphones to the point where you can actually hear what you're recording. It's very natural sounding, very accurate headphone amplifier as well. And it's customizable with presets. So we can create presets. We can monitor pre-fade, post-fade. We can create presets for camera returns or USB inputs. And those are all very easily recallable via the menu. All right, MixPre as an interface. So when you're connected to a computer, we can send up to 96K, 16, 24, or 32-bit integer. And we're the first product on the market to be able to send 32-bit float audio as an interface. Now, the caveat there is you've got to be running Windows 10 or Mac OS Catalina or later. And then, of course, we've got to go to a compatible program. But really, all the usual suspects at this point are 32-bit float capable. And then again, just to reiterate, we are capable of recording and streaming to a USB host simultaneously. It's kind of nice in this scenario. If we were recording on a MixPre and there was any sort of individual cleanup that needed to happen per channel, you're going to have more flexibility by being able to record all those isolation tracks in for each USB stream as well as your local audio after the fact. Media. We offer a few SD cards, and the benefit for us doing this is we are essentially able to test these cards and then have the manufacturer lock in those settings. In the past, we would put out an approved media list, and then somewhere along the line, the manufacturer would make a running change that would affect performance in not only our machines, but really any machines, cameras or recorders alike. So we offer a 64 gig and 128 gig card. These are available through any of our resellers, including TC Furlong. And then we do also put out an approved media list as well. So that's our way of basically saying, hey, you can use just about any Class 10 card from a reliable manufacturer. But we do further testing as well. We actually do very extensive testing, and it's the media has to pass all of our rigorous testing in order to make that approved media list. So if you see a product listed there, you can be confident it's going to work.
Joel, what's the maximum size for a SD card that you can use with MixPre?
Great question. We can address up to 512 gigabyte. My best recommendation, though, would be to stick with anywhere from 32 to 128 gig cards. And the reason is we don't necessarily want to treat media as a hard drive. We want that to be a transfer device from the recorder to a more stable place like a computer or an external hard drive to store that content.
Sure.
Okay, just a couple unique features I wanted to talk about in our record menu. So the MixPre II Series offers pre-roll. And for anybody who might not be familiar with pre-roll, the way that works is the recorder is essentially always in record mode when you have pre-roll engaged. And it's very common that sound effects recordists or nature recordists, like somebody out recording birds would be a great example. They might hear a bird start to sound off. They might not want to have their recorder running for hours on end and have to sift through all of that content to find the one bird sound they were after. So pre-roll is a way of basically when they hear that bird sound off, they can hit record and it's going to start recording 10 seconds ago and then run concurrent. So I don't know if I did a great job of explaining that, but I'm sure you guys get the gist. Remix is very unique to us as well. So remix is a non-destructive way of re-recording your isolation tracks to a new mix in real time on the MixPre itself. So a use case for this might be somebody doing an interview where they've got a few lavs and a boom. And at the end of the interview, they might discover one of their channels was very low or too high. We can go into remix mode, and right on the device, we can re-record the left and right mix without ever putting that audio into a DAW. So just a nice, easy way to make adjustments. And you can adjust the fader level as well as panning. And again, it's non-destructive. So basically what it's doing is using your isolation tracks to generate a new file, and it's recording just the left and right mix. So you would notice in your history that essentially there's a new left and right mix file created. And record triggers. We can take record triggers via compatible HDMI cameras to our micro HDMI connection, or over timecode to our linear timecode input or the BNC inputs on the MixPre 10. So the record trigger just means when you're engaging record on the camera, it'll send a flag down that HDMI stream and our recorder can pick it up and go in and out of record mode along with the camera. And then speaking of timecode, the first generation of MixPre series, we could take external timecode in, but you had to have a consistent timecode source connected. Now with the Mark II series, we have a timecode reader and generator built into the 3, the 6, and the 10. And then this is my most uninteresting slide here, guys, but I just wanted to touch on presets. It's so common that our customers are using these products in multiple different scenarios. So you can create presets and that'll capture all of the global settings as well as any channel specific settings. And you could save that as a setup file to either one of the 4 onboard slots or to an SD card. You can record unlimited presets to an SD card and easily recall those presets. Okay, I'm going to switch over to my camera here and I want to show the Wingman app. So I've got it running here on an iPhone 8. So the Wingman app connects via Bluetooth to any of the MixPre series, and it gives us record, start, stop, as well as meter views, track naming, and metadata entry, as well as sound report creation. So this is a fantastic tool. For me, I'm using it right now as sort of a confidence monitor. I can see that my levels are clean and not clipping. It's nice for sound effects recording as well, because we're all using fairly sensitive microphones out in the field, so you can get some distance away from your recorder and your microphone and not pollute your own recording. So this is a free app that's available on iOS or Android. Yeah, nice tool that mates with this product.
So Joel, how does that connect to the MixPre?
So the MixPre has Bluetooth built in by default, and it's
Okay.
on by default, I should say. So to connect, we would simply touch on the Sound Devices logo. And then you can see I've got 3 MixPres here. Can you see that okay, Brad?
Yeah.
So I'm connected to a MixPre 6, but you basically just touch on the appropriate MixPre, and most of us are going to be out in the field with one MixPre, so you just have the one device that would show up in your menu. So very easy to connect. Bluetooth is defeatable as well, by the way, so if you have any reason to turn that off, you can turn that off by the system menu. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about the USB-A port and some peripheral products that work with the MixPre series. Now, the MixPre II series, the USB-A port is hub capable. Now, how much you can connect to that hub will all depend. It's basically, you're limited by the power that's on a USB-A connection. So, for example, if you're out in the field, you'd want to use a keyboard that doesn't have a lot of LEDs or bells and whistles. You want to keep that relatively basic. But if you have a powered hub, you can use anything you want to connect. So that allows us to use a keyboard for metadata entry as well as shortcut commands. And then we also are compatible with X-Keys products. Now, if you're not familiar with X-Keys, that's a device that will emulate keyboard commands. And the nice part is you can create macros. So you can actually have that device with the push of one button feed several commands to the MixPre. We've had a lot of customers implementing this over COVID. So you can actually remote a MixPre by using this. There's some third-party products to get that done. So we've had some interesting conversations over this past year. You know, customers are struggling to get back to work, and they're looking for safe ways to do that. So we were looking at different ways of implementing some of that workflow for them. And then we're compatible with 4 USB controllers: the Novation Launch Control, the Korg Nano Control 2 and Nano Control Studio, and the Akai MIDI Mix. And this is a pretty elegant implementation on these controllers. So you connect via USB-A, you'll get a pop-up menu on the MixPre that just recognizes which controller is connected, and it'll auto-configure. And then via the shortcuts menu, you'll notice some of these recorders have soft keys that are programmable, and those would show up in the shortcuts menu as a controller setting and allow you to designate the function of those buttons. So for example, in my home studio, I'm using a Launch Control XL, and I've got record, start, stop programmed to these keys. And you've got a few other options as well. Now the features vary based on which model you go with, but it's all auto mapped to the MixPre. So there's not a whole lot of programming that would be necessary. In fact, you wouldn't have to program at all. You could just connect and you'd have trim control, panning, high pass, faders, record arming, mutes, and solos. And it's kind of nice to have that in a tabletop format. The one differentiator I should mention is the Korgs are the lightest. The faders, I wouldn't say feel very high end, but one nice feature that they've got is they do have the transport controls dedicated on the device. So there would be no additional mapping that's necessary there. But in terms of feel, I would say the Novation Launch Control and the Akai MIDI Mix have a little bit more substantial feel. One nice thing about the Akai MIDI Mix is everything is very low profile as well. So if you operate out of a backpack, that's probably the way I would go, just to make sure that you're not destroying your trim pots or faders in a backpack. Okay, so plugins. We offer a few plugins on our website for the MixPre series. And part of the reason we can do that is because we did upgrade the amount of horsepower in a MixPre. So starting off, the Ambisonics plugin. If anybody's not familiar with Ambisonics, that's a single point source microphone with several capsules meant to give you an easy way to capture surround sound audio. But there is a workflow that's involved with that. The audio coming directly off the capsule is referred to as A format. And then that's generally arranged depending on post requirements as B format. And there's several different flavors of B format. So with the Ambisonics mode installed, that gives us the ability to take that A format audio and convert to B format in real time. And then we took it a step further. We can also monitor in binaural as well as record a stereo binaural track. So you've kind of got the best of both worlds. You've got an idea of what the end result is going to sound like, but you still have full flexibility in editing with that captured A or B format file. So that was developed in conjunction with Sennheiser. That works with their Ambio mic, and it also works with the Rode NTSF1. And we also offer the Musicians Plugin. So the Musicians Plugin, think of that as loading a new firmware to the device that changes all of the parameters over towards dedicated musical parameters. So when you have this installed and you go to create a new project, your MixPre is going to ask, do you want a music project or an audio project? And if you select music, it's going to have you name the song, select the sample rate. You have the option of importing and recording, and then you can create that project. And then you'll see that the screen changes over to this screen. Now the box is essentially showing you the active inputs at one time, but the channel count is consistent across the MixPre 3, the 6, and the 10. So it turns all three products into a 12-track recorder, and you can record up to the amount of preamps that the device has at one time. So on the MixPre 3, it would be 3, the 6 would be 4, and the MixPre 10 would be 8 in at one time. And then we've got the usual features for a music application as well. There's a very high quality reverb algorithm that we developed. It's absolutely stunning. And what I love about Sound Devices is we could have very easily went knocking on another manufacturer's door and asked for a reverb plugin, but that's not our engineering team style. So they developed that from the ground up, and it's a beautiful sounding, beautiful sounding reverb based on a vintage reverb. And we've got a metronome built in. We also have a vocal air processor built in, so you can use one instance of that at a time. And then after you've captured up to 12 tracks, you've got the ability to bounce that down so that you can continue recording. You can render it as an AAC file or a 2-channel broadcast wave file. But the way I use this is I basically record stems on the MixPre series, and then I'll take those files into an editing program and edit with waveform. Nice feature to have there. And then last but not least, NoiseAssist. And this is the latest plugin that we've released. And this is absolutely incredible. And I think I can give you a little demo here as well. So I guess first off, to tell you what NoiseAssist is, it's a way of attenuating noise in real time. So it's a noise suppression algorithm. On the MixPre series, you can run one instance at a time, and that can be assigned to any input or left or right audio track. Again, it's real time. There's only a 2 millisecond delay, and very simple integration here as well. It's just on or off, and you pick which channels it's assigned to. And it's up to 20 dB of attenuation. Now, for those of you who are wearing headphones, you may be able to hear this, but I've been doing this entire presentation with 6 dB of noise assist. And I'm going to start to dial that out slowly. And you should start to hear my noise floor come up significantly. You can hear a little bit of room ambience. I'm in a typical conference room here with parallel walls. There's no sound treatment. And we've got an 80-degree day today, which is rare in Wisconsin, so I'm sure we've got some AC going as well. Now this is 0 dB, and I'm going to start to dial that back. And I'm at 6 dB right now, and now I've dialed it down to 10 dB. Now, certainly if you over exaggerate this, you will start to hear some artifacts in the voice. The sweet spot we find is anywhere from 3 to 6 dB, because generally you do want a little bit of liveness in the room. You just want to tame it. Could you hear that while I was doing that, Brian?
Yeah, there was definitely a noise floor that came up when you brought that out. So
Okay.
That was great.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so that's available on our website as well. And one of the primary features that was released in MixPre II Series was the ability to capture 32-bit float. So I'm going to give you the sales guy description of 32-bit float, because when I speak to our engineers about the mathematics on this, my eyes glaze over and it's just not my forte. So easiest way to explain this is first the limitations of 16-bit and 24-bit files. So a 16-bit file has 96 dB of dynamic range. A 24-bit file has 144 dB of dynamic range. A microphone is capable of producing well beyond 144 dB of dynamic range. So that's why we pay attention to gain staging. That's why with a challenging source, we're going to need to ride that input gain or fader so that we don't clip our recording. 32-bit float files, the file container has 1528 dB of dynamic range. It's more dynamic range than could be produced on Earth. So we are recording into an incredibly large file container. But to make use of that, we need to have a few things. So the first thing I'd mention is the preamp. We want to have a low noise preamp. We want to have, and actually we have a patent on a dual stage or multi-stage, I should say, A to D input converter path. So we have multiple converters on each input that are handling a portion of the dynamic range. And what that allows us to do is record full resolution regardless of SPL. So you can have a whisper or a scream into our device. It's going into such a large file container that we're not going to clip that file container. So we can literally go back after the fact in a post program and adjust that audio without any sort of signal degradation. So I threw this in at the last moment. This is an animation of a file that we used at IBC when we launched this. And we were literally on the show floor with our preamp turned all the way up, screaming into a microphone so that we could clip that file. The 24-bit file, of course, when you do gain reduction, there's no recovering that clipped file. But with 32-bit float, this was in Adobe Audition. We were able to do gain reduction and show that in real time, and the audio remains absolutely pristine. So I'm convinced, and I think a lot of us are, that this is going to be an industry standard going forward. Just a couple of applications I can think of where you would use this. In production sound, it's very common to do what we call a bag drop scenario. And that's where the sound mixer literally wires up a car, puts his production sound bag in the trunk, and then waves goodbye, puts it in record and waves goodbye and hopes he's got a usable recording when it comes back. With 32-bit float, that's guaranteed. And the other is for any time you're recording a very unpredictable sound source. A customer brought up a great application for this. He was recording thunderstorms and he wanted to get the raindrops. He was using a very sensitive microphone, so he'd have his gain set for the raindrops. And then a clap of thunder would hit. And with a 24-bit file, you'd either engage the limiter or clip the recording. So just a great application where he could go back and do gain reduction after the fact and not lose anything in terms of his audio quality. And that's my dog and pony show, guys.
All right. Well, we already got some questions here. So, Joel, I think we can just jump right into some of these. We got a question from Nicole about battery usage. And so she says, when I turn on my MixPre 10, I always get a AA battery warning saying voltage is too high. Should I switch to I mount setting? I have lithium batteries as backup. what should the AA setting be selected? Is that something that we could help her with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a great question. And I did some testing with this early on. So L series batteries are basically what the battery indicator is telling us is what the incoming voltage is. And based on most batteries, it's going to tell us when it drops below a certain voltage or exceeds a certain voltage, it's going to tell us that we should change our parameters to monitor that, or the device is going to shut down. So that's all it's doing, is looking at incoming voltage. So an L series battery or a lithium battery will deplete at about the same point, at about the same voltage as an alkaline battery. But what the MixPre is doing is initially looking at that incoming voltage and saying, this might be an L series battery or a nickel metal hydride battery. So what I do when I have lithium batteries in the unit is just leave it set to alkaline. And then I know that I'm running through that full battery before I change the batteries.
Gotcha.
But honestly, my best recommendation there, lithium certainly does a great job, but I switched over to nickel metal hydride batteries. I like the N-Loop Pros or the IKEAs, and it's just a personal preference. That way we're not throwing batteries away as opposed to recharging them.
Sure.
Hopefully that helps.
We got a couple questions from Michael. First was about, are there any plans to update Wingman app? He then added, please add fast forward and fast backward to Wingman.
Okay.
But are there any plans in the immediate future here for Wingman or musician plugin updates?
You know, our engineering team is always working on things. A lot of times I'm finding out shortly before our customers are.
Sure.
Just because we've always got a lot of projects in the works. But what I will say is we're always feeding this information back to our engineering team. And we're always interested in this type of feedback as well. So I'll certainly bring that up.
Speaking of updates, I believe there was just a recent firmware update. Is that right?
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, we had a firmware update go out today. That was primarily a maintenance release. If there's anything that we feel we can improve on, a lot of times it's non-customer facing, then we'll go ahead and put out a firmware release, and that covers the original MixPre series, the MixPre M models, which were the musician dedicated models, as well as the Mark IIs. So yep, you're absolutely right. We released version 7.12 today. We always recommend updating to the latest code as soon as you can.
Great. And kind of circling back to that, the original MixPre series did have two separate models. One was for the musicians and the standard model. Now with the MixPre II series, the musician is just a plug-in addition to the standard MixPre, correct?
That's exactly right.
And you can actually run that in either mode once you have the plugin installed? You
can. So when you go to start a new project, that's where the MixPre will ask you if you want to go into audio mode or music mode. And what we found is the M models, certainly, I think the concept was good, but we did confuse a lot of customers with that. I was constantly answering, hey, what's the difference between the M model and the standard model? And can I use the M model for production sound? And based on the architecture and overdubbing within one file, you know, it's not ideal to do that. So we thought this would be a little more, a little easier to digest and understand.
That's great. We've got another question from Michael here. Will MixPre 2 work with the coming iPad Pro as a Thunderbolt interface? So I know it is a USB-C connector on that. So is that compatible with Thunderbolt with iOS?
You know, a lot of times when you connect to an iOS device, you will get some functionality. I don't know what our current roadmap is with Apple. I know there is a pretty strict approval process there. So certainly something I'll feed back to engineering as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of customers interested in that functionality.
Sure. We got a question from John here. He asks, I really like to see the levels clearly. Would you recommend focusing on the Wingman app, or should I just look at the green rings flashing on the pots and not worry much about levels? He mentions he does usually record at 24-bit.
Okay.
And so what would you suggest for him?
I always have the Wingman app going, but I find my eyes always going to the LED rings. It's just such a quick, easy way of spot checking your input channels rather than looking down at the numbers and determining which channel might be a little hot or a little low. The other thing I would mention there is I always record very modestly with the MixPre series because of how low noise our preamp is. And that's
Sure.
counter to everything I learned about gain staging, right? I mean, we were all
Sure.
taught if you started learning on analog equipment, you always wanted to push that signal as hot as you possibly could to push down noise floor in the next device. But it's truly not necessary. If you're starting with a good signal source, even recording in 24-bit, I would just record a little bit more modestly. Certainly won't hurt if you hit the limiters, but I just find it's not necessary. So typically I'm targeting anywhere from -30 to -20 dBFS with my peaks.
Okay, sure. We have a question from Dries, I believe. Hey, I want to buy a MixPre 10. I have a USB power bank that can output 5/6 volt, 2 amps, and have a Hiroshi to USB adapter. Will this work with MixPre 10?
I suspect it will. Well, no, forgive me. The Hiroshi adapter is looking for anywhere from 10 to 18 volts.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I think that would be a pretty quick draw on a power bank anyways. You may not
Sure.
get the desired runtime there. So honestly, the way I go is with L series batteries. There's so many manufacturers that make them at this point. As long as you
Great.
stick with somebody who's pretty reputable, you get a good runtime.
Another question from John here. Is Wave Agent going to incorporate 32-bit float?
We've had a lot of requests for this lately. So I know this is certainly on everybody's mind here. I'm not sure what the roadmap is at this point, but I know that's kind of a sticking point at this point.
Sure.
If you want to combine or separate files, it's not yet 32-bit float compatible. So I will definitely pass that on as another feature request.
Sure. We have a question from Nick regarding linking. Is it possible to link 3 channels as an LCR configuration? Currently, I link 1 or 2 for the stereo mic, manipulate 3 as an independent center. Is there a significant or slightly more elegant method to that?
Sure. So I can show this to you on a MixPre 10. So just going into our channel 1 menu here, go to page 2 for linking. We've got a lot of options here. So this would be the same on the 3 and the 6 as far as flexibility, but we have 1 through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then once you're linked, you have access to the linking type as well. So you can link just at the faders or in that LCR configuration. If they are matched capsules, then you can certainly link all, and all of those parameters will follow suit.
That's great. And so the panning can be independent in that case, with the level being linked together potentially.
You know what? Let's look at that. I'm going off memory here, but yeah, I know at least, well, even if you're linking just 2 channels, like if you're linking a stereo pair, it's going to start by hard panning left and right, but you can adjust those pans anywhere you'd like. Yep.
Great.
So in that scenario, if we were to do channels 1 through 3, let's just make sure I'm giving them good information here. And then we go back. Yeah, you would have individual pan control over all 3 channels.
Great. We've got another question from Nicole. And forgive me, I'm not familiar with some of this equipment. She mentions, I've been using Tentacle sync boxes.
Yep.
Last week on a shoot, MixPre fell out of sync with a Tentacle/camera after I shut down the recorder, only for a short period of time. It's never happened before. Any ideas what could have happened?
Yep. So there is an internal coin cell battery that charges the timecode circuit and holds timecode over a shutdown. So my best recommendation there would be to power down the device and connect to AC power to charge that internal coin cell. And 9 times out of 10, that takes care of it. Some years down the road, those coin cells might need to be replaced, but generally we get a nice long life out of them, several years.
That's great.
And I believe we should hold time code for at least 4 hours. So
Okay.
plenty of time for a nice break.
Another question that I had before here is, we talked about using MixPre as a USB interface. And so that's what I kind of wanted to point out is the flexibility of this equipment. Coming from a live engineer perspective, I know the idea of being able to record on an SD card while also streaming USB to a computer to potentially be multi-track recording there as well. Pick it up and go with a battery to then do a recording right outside from front of house afterwards is great. Can you talk about using it in like a teleconferencing scenario as well?
Sure, absolutely. Similar to what we're doing now, right?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of flexibility, many different ways this can be configured, but all depending on how many individual interviewees you're going to have coming in over, whether it's Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it might be.
Sure.
Typically what I'll do is, like I'm running a Mac. First thing I'll do is set it up in the preferences and the audio MIDI screen as a 2x2 interface. So rather than opening up all of the capabilities of
Sure.
the USB streams, I set it as 2x2. And that simplifies my routing to and from the computer. And then I keep my local inputs on channels 1 and 2, and then my returns on channel 3 and 4. So that gives me the flexibility of recording those isolation tracks, both from the teleconferencing software as well as my local microphones. And then should you encounter any sort of issues with that sort of echo or loop back that tends to happen, then we've got USB output routing to work with as well.
That's
so as
great.
long as you're in advanced mode, you would have that available on your output settings.
That's great. We got several more questions that just came in here, so I'll try to get through all of these.
Okay.
Victor mentions, I already have a MixPre 6. Can I use 2 external preamps and an aux input to get 6 mic pre's?
You can.
And that would have to come in on a stereo TRS cable into the device, correct?
It would. So we would need a breakout cable, essentially.
Yeah.
So you'd have your XLR females on the cable end or 1/4-inch TRS, whatever it might be, combined to the 3.5 millimeter mini. And then I'll switch over to my camera view here. So via the input screen, we can call that input a line level source, and then the MixPre is going to be looking for a stereo line level input.
Okay.
So then we can go to our 9 and 10 screens and we can dictate the type of input. So chances are that would be a line level in. Go back here. So, okay, it's designated as line level input. So we would then be, you'd have the flexibility of those 2 individual inputs coming in. That's another use case scenario for this. In fact, our MixPre and our MixPre D were commonly used for this. These are legacy products for us now, but this is an original MixPre. Trying to give you a decent view of it. Again, you can see I've always built stuff like a tank, but this is 2 high quality preamps and then going to 2 XLR outputs, and we could certainly combine that to a 3.5 millimeter input. And then as long as 9 and 10 are panned, you'd have individual ISO tracks for those inputs as well.
Great. Another question from John. He says, I love my MixPre 10 Series Mark II, but I still take a backup recorder with me just in case. Am I being sensible, or is it not really necessary as the chances of the MixPre failing is pretty remote?
When we speak with production sound engineers who are on multi-million-dollar film sets, their saying is 2 is 1, 1 is none.
Sure.
And I think that rings true. I would absolutely bring it back up. no manufacturer is immune to, issues. There could be a problem. You could, our products are used around salt water. I mean, there's any number of things that could happen on
Sure,
set.
of
right?
course.
So, yeah, I think it's always ideal to have a backup.
Nothing against being prepared.
Absolutely.
Nicole, circling back to her question about Timecode after shutdown. So she asked, so should I plug in the recorder every now and then to make sure that the Timecode battery is charged?
I would.
Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, our last question, I think we're going to wrap up here shortly, from John is, have you dialed in any audio delay into your MixPre to sync to the camera to sound in your setup?
I have. So currently I've got 200 milliseconds of output delay on the MixPre. So we're in pretty good sync here. It's not perfect. It's unfortunately my switcher and then the combination of running my presentation that kind of threw it.
Sure.
So it's just something unfortunately I had to run with.
But that's on the input level that you're able to dial in that delay?
Input and output. So on the output, great. I've got 200 milliseconds dialed in, but on each individual input, we also have delay, I believe up to 30 milliseconds. So,
okay, great.
For example, for a long time, customers were using Sennheiser AVX wireless with our products. That had a known 19 millisecond delay. So if they were using a lav over wireless and a boom, they could easily go in and dial in that 19 milliseconds on the boom.
Sure.
Timeline, everything.
That's great. All right, I think that's all of our Q&A here. There will be a exit survey, and so if there are any additional questions that you can think of at that point, feel free to enter it into the exit survey as well. I'll share my screen here. If you have any additional questions, you can email us at sales@tcfurlong, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. And if we need to, get Joel or the Sound Devices team involved to help any kind of troubleshooting, we're happy to help. So at this point, Joel, thank you so much for your time today and the great presentation. A reminder of how flexible the MixPre II Series is for just about every application.
Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks everybody for attending. I know we've all had our fair share of Zoom over the last year, so thanks for taking the time out of your day today.
And I would like to thank Matt Collera with the TC Furlong team, who's been helping us out with our video switching and all of the Zoom assistance. Thanks, Matt. We can't do it without you here. At this time, I'd like to announce the next webinar in our series here is actually going to be with a good friend of the company, James Staffo, where we're going to do a two-part webinar series with him. The first is going to be about antenna theory for wireless microphones, and that's going to be on Tuesday, May 25th. And then we'll also have a strategies for large-scale wireless system deployment webinar with him on June 22nd. James has done his fair share of large system deployments, everything from CMAs to some Super Bowls. So it'll be great to pick his brain. These are both free webinars for anyone to sign up. We'll make sure to send a link for these webinars also in our follow-up email, where we'll also include a link to the video of this webinar for everyone that attended here today. So Joel, thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone for your time and attending here today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at the sales@tcfurlong email address.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.